I might need like action. Not action, but like
I am rolling.
Ah, that's helpful. I'm really excited because this is going to be my first like proper cooking video, and we're making a flat pie. Essentially. Not really flat pie. A galette, which is the French term that we just found out for flat cake, but essentially flat pies. I've been feeling definitely the trend towards savory now in the new year, so it's going to be a gruyere, new potato, sweet potato galette with parsley oil, which sounds like a lot, but we're really only tackling like 3 things. So I'm gonna do a classic pie crust, surprisingly easier than you would think, and then we're gonna talk about the toppings and then the parsley oil. So we're tackling 3 things, but they're all super easy, super doable. So first, the pie crust. Recipe that I'm doing makes 2 crusts, and that is kind of about 2 cups of flour, 1 cup of butter, and 2 teaspoons of salt. That's all you need, because the butter's the main aerating factor in the pie crust. Because when you get flake from a pie crust, it's because you have these humongous chunks of butter in it that when it hits the heat, it melts, it aerates the flour, and you get all these flaky crusts. What I suffer from is hot hands. My fingers get like pretty warm, which with pie crust is not ideal because you want to keep it as cold as possible because you want to keep the butter intact. So what I do to kind of mitigate that is I put all the butter cubes in the flour at once and then toss them immediately in the flour. You want to get each butter cube completely coated before we start actually working this into a dough. We're going to be adding water later, and you want it to be ice water because again, we're keeping everything super, super, super cold. Right now what I have is 6 tablespoons of water that I have refrigerated. I don't have room in my freezer to put it, but if you have a standing up freezer and can put ice and water in there for like 5 minutes while you're working on the dough, do that. If you don't, just right before you use it, put an ice cube in the water and let it hang out while we mix the rest of the pie crust. Some ambiance. Now, once all the butter is coated in flour, we're gonna start breaking it up with our fingers. Each butter cube, you wanna break it into about like 2 to 3 pieces and then keep coating it in the flour. So the goal is to have the butter always coated in flour because that way it's got like a nice protective barrier around it and you can keep working and the risk of like messing it up is relatively low. This is a good example piece, like this big. And you don't have to hit every cube and cut it into 2 to 3. You just wanna hit most cubes. Let me see if I can get a good texture shot. So that's like the texture you'll be going for. And this is also a process that is allowed to be messy. I think that's where people freak out about pie crust being a lot of work, is they just don't, like you don't allow yourself to be like pretty sloppy with it. And I'm a big advocate of sloppy pastry at home. Like at a bakery, you can't pull that shit. But here, totally fine. Case in point. Okay, so now that it reaches a texture where you can kind of smush it together and it holds a bit, but then immediately crumbles apart, that's when we know, okay, now I'm getting a little too sloppy. You don't want butter flying out of the bowl. Great. But that is when we know that we can start adding the water. And then we can just work in. I'm not gonna say similar to a pasta dough, but you're definitely working the batter in. But once it gets to this texture, then I'm gonna move it to a work surface. Now I'm super lucky. I bought this island from CB2, I think, and it's marble topped. So I know that my work surface is gonna be pretty cold. But if you can get like a colder part of your kitchen, that's what you want to do for this. What we're now doing is we're going to like roughly laminate this. Now some people say you can add flour during this part. You don't need to. But we are taking this pie crust that's like, as you can see, very roughly connected. You can see lots of flakes of butter. We're gonna cut it into 3s and then stack them on top of each other. And you'll be able to see the layers of butter and flour as we push down and then rotate and then do it again. Let me get all the pieces off my fingers really quick. I'm using a bench scraper, but if you don't have one, you can also use a knife and just placing it on top. This is the part that feels like most like adult Play-Doh to me. My hands are now hot, so I kind of rely on the bench scraper to do a lot of the work for me here. And then you can see the lamination layers. But as you push down, all those layers will then be part of the crust that we're working with. All right, so laminated it 3 times, and I do want it in more of a rectangle as opposed to a square because this is 2 crusts. So I want to be able to cut down the middle when we finally put it together. Okay, so we got this, and now it is time to saran wrap it. I pre-cut mine because you don't need to see me struggle. Just kidding, you're gonna see me struggle. So you flatten this out, try to aim for 1 inch, but I'm always thicker. Fold the saran wrap over so that it's completely sealed. And if anybody has like a reusable type of cling wrap or saran wrap that they really like, hit me up. I found saran wrap works best for this process, but there's always other options. Okay, that was a horrible noise, but then what we're gonna do is take a rolling pin and roll this dough out. Excuse me. Roll this dough out until it hits the corners tightly. Essentially, we're just making this really uniform, really smooth, giving that lamination like one last push together so that when we're finally ready to use the dough, it'll be like fairly easy to work with. That was my dog sighing on the floor. He is always here. He's essentially our sous chef, so everybody say hello to Walter. All right, all right, all right. Pie crust done. Can I set you down? Okay, filling time. Now, this was actually inspired by like a pizza I came across once. So it is gonna be sweet potato and yellow potato, Gruyere with parsley oil. I tried to edit this down to make sure that it was high on flavor, but like low on a bunch of like extraneous ingredients. So it's still super impressive, but you don't need that much. I'm doing like these tubular sweet potatoes. They're not yams, I promise, because the smaller is better for the look. And what I'm gonna be doing is thinly slicing those. You can do that with either a knife or a mandolin. I'm gonna be using a mandolin. And then same with these are Dutch yellow potatoes, but even new potatoes would work. Anything like very thin is gonna give you like the best cut. And then the parsley oil, we're gonna layer it on the bottom with the Gruyere cheese. And that's just parsley, lemon, garlic, salt, and olive oil. It's like a quick gremolata. Okay, so this mandolin, I got it for like $10 at Target. It is by no means necessary, but it gives you a really, really nice cut. I'm setting it on level 1 because I want it pretty thin. And please, if you do have a mandolin, be very careful. Now this is the thinness you're going for. It's pretty thin because anything thicker won't cook all the way. I know a lot of galettes like pre-cook things like caramelized shallots or like beets or stuff like that. This we're cooking it with the dough because I wanted this recipe to be, if you truly wanted a weeknight galette, you could go 0 to galette in an hour. Easy flat pie. What I'm arguably most known for, tiny blender. So you can put this in a big blender. It won't really blend as quickly or as well because big blenders, there's like lots of surface area, whereas tiny blender like keeps everything together. So you can really get like a nice blended sauce quickly. No, I'm not sponsored by Tiny Blender, which is why we're calling it Tiny Blender. But the great part is you just throw all the parsley in there. I have a lemon juicer. I'm not gonna use it. So juice comes out, seeds go into your hand. Make life easy. And when I say make life easy, I mean make life messy. I'm regretting this deeply right now. Lemon juice, garlic. This is kosher salt, so it's pretty salty, so 1/4 teaspoon. And then, I'm not in the business of telling you to buy really expensive olive oil, but if you can get to Trader Joe's and get this, it tastes like a really well done olive oil. It is Italian sourced, and if you're in the United States and you're interested in like a good olive oil, I'd try to go for California sourced ones. Those tend to be fresher. I really like this olive oil and it's great for sauces like this. I'd say we've got about 1/3 cup of oil in there. And then we blend it up. So once the potatoes are done, I'm actually gonna toss them in olive oil and salt and pepper now. so that I don't have to do it while I'm assembling the galette. If you don't do this step, they kind of dry out on the galette and like they just don't look as nice. They aren't as seasoned unless you're seasoning every step of the way. It's just a drizzle of olive oil. It's not gonna kill you. And then salt and pepper and toss. Potatoes are prepped. We just slice the cheese and then we'll be ready to assemble. Oh, nothing to see here. Game time. This I actually made this morning around 7:30 a.m. Now, the more you can chill a pie dough, the better, because when heat hits the butter, you want the butter to like melt instantaneously, release all that air, help the crust puff up in a sense, and the cooler it is, the more it'll do that. I always have pie dough on hand, and if you don't believe me, try me. Now, flouring your surface, they say to use as little as possible. I say use as much as you need, not to like majorly fuck it up. Once you have a pretty good foundation of lamination, any extra flour on the outside, it's really not gonna harm your crust too much. A lot of people hit the dough to warm it up. I just roll. Go with the flow. Go with the flow. Kind of just work it out until it heats up just a little bit. Also, I'm a very relaxed galette maker. I know I'm starting with a square piece of pie crust. I understand a square is not a circle. I just cut off the edges. Life is too short to be worrying about making it into a circle before you roll out. I know I was saying I go with the flow. You don't want to be like firmly pressing down. You just kind of want to be encouraging the crust to flatten out. The number one piece of advice I could give to literally anybody who is like slightly intimidated by baking or pie crust is like the ingredients want to work with you, and it's just about you wanting to work with them. Like nothing should ever feel forced. Here we actually have some butter breakage. Totally normal. What I do is just seal it up with flour, same way that you would a rough puff pastry. Not the end of the world. Again, since everything's already pre-laminated in there, it's gonna take, see even more butter breakage? It's gonna take a lot to make this a bad result. Okay, so we can see the shape is kind of coming out now. This looks pretty good. The thinness is like thin. We're gonna go with a solid thin. And I'm gonna get out parchment paper because once we start putting on the toppings, we want it to be super easy to handle. And to get this on there, delicately roll our dough up onto the rolling pin. Glamorously effortless, and then roll it back down. Cute. Totally imperfect, but like this is the circle we're gonna go for. I'm probably gonna bake off these edges into like little pie crust strips. They're so good. Since it's a galette, this is a very rustic circle, more like an oval.
Ovals are now called rustic circles.
Okay, so now I'm going to actually brush a thin layer of the parsley oil. And this is because, again, minimal ingredients, max flavor potential. My favorite tool in my kitchen. It's a microplane, in case you were wondering. I actually don't have a cheese grater because this is a pretty small kitchen. So I don't have a box grater because like why use up the extra space when my microplane can literally do it all. It's a pretty hefty layer of cheese. I never claimed to be a minimalist. Now, potatoes. This will take some time, but when I first tested this galette, I was seasoning each potato as I was going, and then I drizzled the top with olive oil, and it was during quarantine, so I had the time, but it nearly broke me. So I'm glad we pre-seasoned everything. That way we can kind of just do a really like satisfying concentric circle. I love the ambient sirens of New York City. Can you hear it?
Oh yeah.
And then rustic. Now, I have always talked about impact minimizing recipes, which is like, why use a certain ingredient if you don't absolutely need to? And case in point for this recipe especially is egg. Egg wash frustrates me so much because I whisk together an entire egg, I brush on like a teaspoon of it, and then I'm like, what do I do with this egg? So I actually use a maple syrup egg wash, and I think for this, which is already like a very savory galette, having like that hit of sweet at the crust is like really nice, and it gives like a really cool contrast. So what I do actually is just a thin layer of maple syrup around the crust. It does the exact same thing an egg wash does, and it's just very good. And then salty sweet on the top. It's so good. Not mandatory, but so good. See you in 35 minutes. Oh, nice. You can still hear it bubbling, which is so extremely satisfying. So I'm just gonna slide it right on out to a cutting board. I'm gonna let it cool before we slice into it. Also, I'm gonna take photos for the gram. Crispy. This feels very brunchy, feels very doable. I love it for a dinner party, like a small intimate one with like some wine, especially with like a really lemony salad with extra pepper. It cuts through the cheesiness. The potatoes are there for like some extra like starchiness and flavor. It's one of my favorite things to make. I don't think it was too hard, and you can use puff pastry if you want to. What else am I forgetting? Oh, like and subscribe. These are gonna be happening more and more. And if you have any recipe requests you wanna see, or like styles, like lunches, easy dinners, let me know in the comments below. I'm so glad if you stayed to the end. I hope you learned something, and I hope to see you in the next one. What was